I know we spoke to a couple different panelists. Let's hear it from the moderator, Nadia Badr Eldin, the head of the English department and founding member of Global Paradigm School. She's going to keep the session going. Give her a round of applause as she comes up here. Come on up here. Such a pleasure to have you. You having fun so far?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. I would like to introduce my panelist team. Dr. Michael Kaur, please. Dr. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself before you take your seat?
Yes, hi everybody. Second introduction, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group, as well as a former superintendent of schools in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Wherever. Yes, you need the mic right there. Right. Our next panelist, Mrs. Maja, please. Still, I have a problem with your second name. So could you please pronounce your second name to the attendees?
Of course. Welcome, everybody. My name is Maja Michalewska. I'm originally from Poland. That's why my last name is so hard to pronounce. I'm a leadership and wellness coach. I founded a company called Elevated Leadership, and my work is to support and empower sustainability leaders to actually lead the change without burning out. And I'm really looking forward to this panel discussion.
Great. Thank you. Our last but not least, Ms. Karam Bashir. Take your time. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't find a front seat. My name is Karam Bashir, and I am the head of primary at Asamiah International School of Jordan. And my role as the head of primary is to support teachers and ensure that that education goes beyond just delivering information and curriculum.
Great, thank you. Okay, as usual, I prepared an introduction to introduce. But then suddenly I decided, no, I'm not going to go to that through the classical way of introducing the topic, because something nice really happened yesterday. For the past week, one of the panelist members kept on sending an email to all of us, pushing us all the way through to meet one day before our session. But the idea that I had in mind is just to meet 1 hour. It doesn't matter. I mean, if we meet 1 hour before the session, why not? It's not a big deal. But she insisted for a whole week, sending emails to all of us, persisting on that we should meet a day before the session. And we did. We met yesterday at the coffee shop in the reception area. And we shared all our knowledge, we shared our laughter, we shared everything. I mean, it was so great of her how she made our meeting very easy and very simple, that we felt, all of us, that we are just members of one body and not a moderator and panelist in a panel discussion in front of the audience. So when I went to my bedroom by the end of the day, I kept on thinking of the interpersonal skills that she had, how she bridged the tension between us, how the emotional skills that she had will make our discussion, today's discussion. And look at her charming smile. She draws it on her face very natural. I wonder what's the impact of that smile when you deal with people in a world with the absence of emotional communication, with the lack of empathy, in a world that is full of challenges, constant challenges, and we don't have that emotional skills anymore. It's not there. Even among the family members, we are losing it. So I would like to start my first question to the team about the universal qualities and capacities needed in order to sustain people and help them overcome the intense, constant challenges that we face in the world and the effect of this on the education workforce. Dr. Michael.
Well, I think you described relationships, right? And when we think about how we create environments that emulate your sentiments, relationships is critical. Once relationships is established, obviously when we think about these universal practices, culture is the next thing we have to be able to address. When we look at culture, that's a specific, it's in the context of developing a shared mental model around the capabilities and capacities to be able to leverage the economic demand strategies within education. As an example, you know, we've underscored a traditional model, an industrial model, I like to say the Jeffersonian model, where now we're in a new economic demand where we can't have supply-driven education, but it has to be demand-driven education. These capabilities, universal capabilities, now in education, we have to add lean practices within our vernacular. We have to add being agile principles within our vernacular. We have to add being adaptive and accepting that there's going to be a level of uncertainty and risk. These are 4 attributes and characteristics that have never been underpinned in education before. I think COVID opened up that opportunity. That was a time to be permissionless where we saw that we have to accept novelty within this new economic demand and now building capabilities as well as capacities aligned to the novelties and the uncertainties that we're seeing within education. We're educating a new student, Generation Alpha, Generation Z. I like to say the nickname for Generation Alpha is Generation Artificial Intelligence. So now we have to be able to build capacities around accepting technology and artificial intelligence into the new model. So, but before we do all of that, relationships and culture are your 2 priority underpinnings, and then those skills.
First of all, thank you. You made me so intimidated. It was me who was reaching out to our lovely panelists to get us together because the first capability that I believe we all need in this augmented reality is presence. So for everybody in the room with the phone in the hand, please put it down just for a moment, because presence requires your heart, your mind, and your gut to be aligned in one place. And I think that's something that AI cannot teach us. Another thing that I found really important is to understand oneself. And the wellness title in my coaching practice comes from Ayurveda, which is ancient Indian transformational wellness science. And what I found so amazing about this science is that it shows us, each of us, we're all individuals with unique skills, but also there are things that connect us. And I think we need to show our students who they are so they can understand themselves. And from there, allow them to connect to their purpose, to their mission, because we all know millennials, Gen Z, and so on, we are impact-driven. If we don't connect to something within us, we don't have fuel to move forward.
So we're talking about ways to revamp the workforce, and the workforce is, as you all know, it's fundamental to the success of any educational process. So I think what's very important is to understand the role of the educator today. Educators today have a role that transcends going into the classroom and covering the syllabus or whatever. We need to cultivate connections that matter. It's all about connections. It starts there and it ends there. as simple as walking to the classroom, checking with your students, checking on them. How's your day so far? How are you feeling? This gives them the sense that you genuinely care about them. And this will cultivate that connection, and ultimately you'll be able to get your message across, whatever your message is. So that's why, from my humble experience, I felt like the teachers who were able to succeed in the classroom the most, whether in classroom management or whether in motivating students, whether in pushing them to work to their highest potential, is the teachers who genuinely cared about that connection. They are passionate about education, and I would like to emphasize on passion, because nowadays the resume is no longer the sole indicator for an educator's performance. As you all know, sometimes we are very impressed by the CV or the resume, but in reality, the educator is completely disconnected from students, and this is very dangerous. The other day, I read something in an educational blog, and I want to share it with you. It says, other aspects of school leadership, such as test scores, teacher evaluation, student discipline, and staff morale, seem to take precedence over teacher recruitment. What's so ironic about the statement? Well, it's when you recruit and hire effective teachers, all those other issues take care of themselves. So you have to reach before you teach and cultivate that connection, so you can have a meaningful impact on any learner.
Right. Okay, Dr. Michael, I mean, now we focus on the emotional intelligence and the role of the relationship in establishing and sustaining the education. Now, the education system, or the current education system, was originated from the first industrial revolution. Can you tell me about the changes that happened throughout the decades up to now, and what kind of changes and visions do we need for the coming education system?
Sorry, I want to make sure everyone hears you.
Yeah.
Can you hear her? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs down, okay. Microphone check, test it on. What's at the bottom here? Sorry about that, guys. Hello, here we go, you're live. Try it one more time.
Now you hear me?
Thumbs up.
Do I have to repeat what I have just said? Yes, really? Okay, thank you. Starting from Dr. Michael? Okay.
Take two.
Okay, Dr. Michael, I think
I hear you loud and clear.
We have mentioned about the importance of the emotional intelligence and its role in building the relationships between not only the workforce, but even with the students and their teachers, and the impact of this on the learning environment and promoting their learning style. Now, but we still have, or we still suffer from the style of teaching or education system that was originated from the first industrial revolutions. Could you tell me about how did the education system change throughout the decades, and your vision about the future educational system?
Well, if you think about it from a policy structure standpoint, well, let me go back. During COVID is when I believe when we discovered that there were 3 stages of education: before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and now after COVID-19. And in the before COVID-19 stage, we know we were perseverating over policies, right? We have a bastion of policies in the United States ranging from NCLB, Race to the Top, A Nation at Risk. I mean, if we even go back to 1954, when Brown v. Board of Education, that was the Great Desegregation, but it was still separate but equal. The adoption of IDEA for special education in 1972. So we have only incrementally gotten better with our model. But what we saw as an effect was the exacerbation of more students falling behind. We were using old psychometrics for proficiency in some of the most, I would say, inequitable policy adoptions. With COVID, during COVID, we've seen these inequities grow. but we also learned that this is a new technological era where now technology has to be the driven lever for this change. So we still now in the AC stage, I like to say, AC stage of education, we're still trying to underpin incremental innovations, modularity and proven systems and structures in the context of whether it be instruction, whether it be operational systems, but we haven't moved to what I like to say, this demand focus, where we have to integrate technology. AI has to be underpinned. We are educating a completely different student. Specifically, when we look at it in the United States, 54% of public education is black and brown. And when we look at it from Generation Alpha, they are 13% coming from non-traditional homes. So we have to be able to change and not double down on best practices in the BC stage of education, but move to next practices in the AC stage of education.
So digitalization and emotional intelligence, do they match?
I think that we have to be able to differentiate, because when we look at the BC stage of education, it was more of a dissemination of information, purveyor of information where I have to regurgitate it back to you. Now, we're in a stage where we have to be able to separate, I like to say, these three prongs in order to meet the emotional intelligence of the students, of every student. Separate time, separate place, and separate learning. We did that during the DC stage of education, where we had to be able to mitigate and use measurement around the novelty of the pandemic, but at the same time mitigate the spread of the virus. But that's where we saw this level of differentiation. You know, that's where we saw the critical needs of our students. So now we have to be able to integrate, we have to be able to innovate, we have to be able to create new opportunities of learning, new opportunities of facilitation of learning to be able to meet the individual needs, whether it be emotional intelligence, as well as IQ, and even BQ for our students.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Maja.
So I will like to refer to this pandemic and post-pandemic world. And I think what we've seen is that students at any stage of education, I'm currently at academia in my doctoral research, and it's prevalent everywhere. We lack emotional intelligence, especially educators. The only way to learn to be human is from another human being. So if we think about the educational workforce, that's where first we should educate. We should teach our teachers how to be emotionally stable, how the mind works, how to balance nervous system, what technology does to our body, because it does a lot. So understanding how to regulate ourselves so we are not fried out after 8 hours before a screen. I think that's something that pandemic showed to us that we are lacking, and post-pandemic world where we have access to Google, to internet, to everything that provides us information that we can memorize or we can just come back and Google it again. What we need actually is this emotional front and self-regulation and understanding of how can we interact with each other in this new world. And I loved previous panels that were mentioning anxiety, mental illness. This is something that we as workforce need to tackle in the first place, because a person who's anxious, who's in the nervous system that wants to just freeze or run away or fight, which is not a regulated nervous system, cannot cope with himself or herself. And I think that's where the workforce comes in, as a model, as a supporter, someone who has place to hold presence for this person to regulate. Because only when you're regulated, your mind is open, you're curious, you can learn.
Karam?
Well, talking about the evolution of education that you just mentioned, nowadays everyone is heading towards establishing a culture that is that promotes friendly connections between management and teachers, teachers and students, and even parents, the learning community, let's say. So I think that's why schools need to invest into, as you just mentioned, Maya, into their teachers' well-being. even when it comes to professional development. In the past, we used to talk about professional development, teaching strategies and techniques, best standards and practices, classroom management, but now we need to have professional development sessions that focus on the teacher's mental well-being, and that's something that we actually, I'm proud to say that we started at our school, where we now have sessions that enable teachers to understand how they can think in a positive way, and ultimately, when they're feeling better about themselves, they can transfer that energy to their students. And also supplying teachers with tools to help them build that connection. So you cannot expect a teacher to have prior knowledge on how to build that connection with her students. Maybe they're genuinely not aware of how you can foster that connection, so supply them with those tools. One example is, for example, you can build a unit that is derived from the students' interests. By the end of the lesson, you can have them do a reflection card. What was your favorite part about today's lesson, for instance? So this way, you're giving the teachers tips on how to foster that connection. And before you do that, you have to invest in your teacher's mental well-being. I think that's very essential.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We focus on professional development courses and programs just for strategies, pedagogical methods, and learning environments and standards, lesson plans, so on. And we do forget something very important, which is, as Maja does, the relationships, the importance of relationships to establish and to sustain all the methods and strategies. Dr. Michael, could you, probably it could be the last question, I don't know about the time, I lost track of time. So
We have 15 minutes.
we have 15 minutes more, but we need 10 minutes for the attendees, right?
Conversation with everybody.
Right.
If you want to continue talking and no one wants to talk, no problem. We'll make it
Okay,
happen. Good?
Dr. Michael, what kind of skills do we need really for the transformation of a learning inside, in the educational system?
I think one, we have to be able to deepen our collective knowledge around interpretation and analyzing data. I think that in the education space, and again, this is more subjective, we only look at, I like to say, small data, small analytics, as opposed to really increasing or accelerating the processes of big data. We have to be able to bring predictive analytics into education. I believe we have to be able to develop skill sets where now we're looking at big data in a variety of different ways to prototype for experimentation, to collect that data continuously, to analyze it, and underscoring predictive analytics and data science as well. So I think, when I look at that one, because we rely on, I like to say, outdated and archaic research, and sometimes empirical studies aren't aligned to the students that we're educating, Generation Alpha and Generation Z. So in order to be able to challenge empirical studies and research, we have to be able to increase our capacity and skill set around big data analytics.
Thank you, Dr. Maja. What we taught in the past is completely different from the skills needed nowadays. So what do we need now for the workforce and for our students to learn and adapt?
I loved what Karam mentioned in her experience working at school. Giving space to the workforce and to students to digest reality. We live in a very, very fast pace of life. We live in many realities at the same time, 3D included. We need to digest all of it, not only the mental and the food we eat, but everything, all the interactions. So asking simple questions, how was this exercise for you? How was your day today? What have you learned? What have you taught? How do you feel? It's so important. This is basic emotional intelligence that if the workforce at schools can master, we will create a really healthy society. Because part of that is what we call in neuroscience resilience. We need resilient people. People who can handle pandemic, post-pandemic, next pandemics, happy life, sad life. We need to prepare students also not only for working in their future jobs and careers, but also for normal life. And that's where resilience comes in.
Right. Karam, I've read that an article about Microsoft that the attention span of students nowadays had reached the limit of 8 seconds only. So they call it a snack bite or a quick bite attention span. So what amount or portion of content do you think that we should be delivering, and the skills that they could master in such a short attention span?
Okay, so
Skills.
This starts with increasing or working on enhancing the engagement level of students. And as I just mentioned, when you build your units based on your students' interests and needs, you are capable of having, let's say, the longest attention span that we can gain from them. So you have to have, we call it, I work at an IB school, so we call it agency, voice, choice, and ownership. You have to give the students, they have to have a voice in your classroom. They have to have ownership of their own learning, and they have to have the choice. When you give them the voice, choice, and ownership, they will, I believe that they will be more engaged, and you will have a better span of attention in the classroom, rather than you being, you're a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage. You're having the learning process centered around students, and that's a culture that we need to instill in our teachers, because it's very difficult. Teachers find it way easily to stand in the center of the classroom, lecture students, and that's it. And that's what causes students to lose the attention and focus throughout the lesson. But when you are basing your teaching strategies based on their preference, by, as I just said, asking them what was your favorite part about today's lesson. So I find out that my students like activity X or task Y, so I can do it more often. And in this way, you have them better engaged in the classroom and have a better attention span, I think.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the attendees, please? Yes?
Okay, great. You're going up already. She knows where to go. All right, she's on her way. Anyone else? Get ready. Get ready. I see a hand up. Just pop up there right after. Don't lose that spot.
I'm Jihan. Actually, all of the things that we're talking about is something that we come to our objective. Everybody's here is looking for something like solutions at the end, something that really we can end up with that conference, something that maybe can be implemented in the way that certain organizations, schools, whatever. So what I'm thinking, actually, that's something that really we can come up, everybody. What is the skills that educator needed nowadays to be easy or to be able to deliver the info in the right way? As an HR, okay, and there is some criteria have been changed lately. The same is the educators, K-12 or higher education. So we need actually that what is the skills that really, what the educator need to be a qualified teacher or educator. Thank you.
Okay, Maya, could you answer this question, please?
And I will repeat my mantra, it's to regulate our nervous system, body, and understand how our mind works. And I think that's something that in this room makes us, actually connects us, because we come from different cultures, from different educational backgrounds. We work in different public, private, other systems, but what connects us is our humanity. We all are in this mind-body organism, and we all need to regulate ourselves. So if you're not familiar with nervous system regulation, just Google it and find on YouTube simple tools that you can apply in your classroom or even at academia, where I'm coming from personally, where you, in small breaks, in 15 to 30 seconds, can allow your mind and your body to enter to a state of curiosity, openness to learning. I think that's something that is crucial, and that's something that modern science is now kind of catching up with older system of sciences like yoga and Ayurveda. And I think that's something that we really need to embrace. It's our humanity, and teach future generations to actually understand how to cope with our times that are changing all the time.
Dr. Michael, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I want to underscore too, and when we just specifically around the skills that is needed now, is that education holistically and stakeholders need to have the skill of integrating artificial intelligence into their classrooms. I think that is one huge gap that we're seeing in education. I like to say minding the gap between machines and stakeholders. So when we look at that, what does that look like in the classroom? When we bring in machine learning, where the front face is an avatar, right? But we're collecting that data on the back to really part and parcel instruction for students. Reimagination of, or digitation of, or digitizing the classroom. So what I think that we need to really focus on now is that artificial and integration into our classrooms, into our systems holistically.
Okay, we have another question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arya from Nikon Middle East, and I have a question to all the panelists, and I'm so glad that you raised the point of emotional intelligence for the teachers, because we work with the schools, and I always see there's a big gap there. I want to ask everyone, what is your institute doing to overcome that in hiring the future educators and making sure that they are equipped with emotional intelligence for the students? So I would like to ask Karam and Dr. Donald.
Karam, could you answer this, please?
Yes, definitely. It's actually, you raised a very important question, because personally we have this challenge at school, because as I mentioned earlier, during the interview, it's very easy for the teacher to answer the questions and get through the interview questions, but then inside the classroom, it's very difficult for you to make sure that there's this alignment, let's say, between what was said in the interview and in reality. So how can you ensure that you are recruiting the correct teacher? It's actually a very difficult process. I actually don't have a clear answer for that. But I think that, in my opinion, maybe we need to have a personality tests. I'm serious. Maybe ask questions that are related to self-regulation and self-motivation, so we can know if the teacher is aware of how she's feeling emotionally. I think that, but it's a very, very difficult question, to tell you the truth, because I'm personally looking for ways to recruit teachers who have self-awareness and have self-management and can do good in the classroom, just like how they're doing good in the interviews.
I agree with your answer. Dr. Michael, do you have anything to add to this? How would we guarantee?
First, when we look at our practitioners, self-care, right, and support. And what we need to see more of in education is one question: how are you doing? Trust, right? And when we think about trust, self-care, and just asking the simple questions, or going up to our practitioners or our teachers saying, I'm with you in this, it changes the dynamic and the paradigm for that teacher. Because I've seen a lot of teachers, especially when I was a superintendent, is the word support that's needed, right? We need more support. And then also, what does self-care look like for the practitioners? Because, you know, during the pandemic and moving towards after the pandemic has been really, really tough in the education field. So I think first and foremost, self-care, and then collective care for our practitioners. And then obviously context matters, what that support looks like for those individual teachers.
Right. Maja, do you have anything to add for this question?
I just want to maybe add to Michael's comment about self-care. I myself came after 2 years of break back to academia, and it was very overwhelming to be back in this world where there is no time even to have lunch. There is academia over lunch. So my personal leadership skills are actually to educate my colleagues, to have lunch when the lunch is due, and have conversations about work when this is due. So having this basic self-care and actually allowing teachers, educators to have space to self-regulate, and having lunch over lunch is self-regulation. Having 15 minutes being in nature is self-regulation. Stepping out of the meeting when you need and have a break to take a breath, it's self-regulation. This acceptance, bringing this normality that we need to regulate to our workplace, and then teach that to students. That's what actually it's a really important skill.
Right, right. I hope the answer to the question satisfied your answer. Thank you.
Hello, Anthony Williams from Connecticut, United States. Just a quick question. You're talking about new visions and revamping education. If there was a clean slate and an ability to create a new framework for education, how would that look to you?
Dr. Michael?
Essentially, one, I would create the framework where it underpins leadership principles that are looking at progressive practices, and then two, incorporating science and data to be able to guide the step function change so that we're able to create a new system for Generation Z and Generation Alpha. Also taking in consideration, too, of our practitioners, right, and our leaders. I always used to tell my leaders and my teachers, it's okay to feel your feelings, right? It's okay to say you're not feeling good today. How can we be able to support you with that? Being able to recognize that, and then also, too, identifying what those changes look like from an equity standpoint. In the United States, equity is a big taboo, right? You can't say the word is polarized. However, when we look at it, you can change the word equity and substitute it for excellence, right? Because everybody wants excellence for our students. So being able to close the excellence gaps for our students and for our families, but more importantly, providing the necessary professional learning and professional development where our teachers are culturally responsive and culturally sensitive, and also making sure that we're able to address all the foundational and fundamental needs of our families and students as well. So that's a nirvana in the United States, right? We want to reach that utopia very, very hard, but again, coupling with the whole emotional intelligence component, creating a framework where leadership, science, and data is underscored for change.
Right, right. Karam, would you like to add anything here to this question?
I actually agree with you, Michael, and I think it's very important to invest in teachers so they can bring out the best versions of themselves, and ultimately they will have their students bring out the best versions of themselves, and this will result in good citizenship later on because you're helping these students grow mentally, emotionally, physically.
Perfect. Maja, would you like to add anything?
So I'm personally working on a book called Elevated Leadership, where I'm including 7 steps, principles for elevated leadership, which means overcoming this limitation of stress life, where we as change makers, because that's the field I'm coming from, are actually having very short span of our work. We're burning out very fast. So the 5 first steps is basically self-care, self-regulation, understanding our bodies. Based on that, connecting to your purpose. What is that I actually want to achieve in this lifetime, in this mind-body organism, and self-leadership and sharing with others. Time's up on my side.
Oh, that's why it turned red.
Yeah, that's it. It's like stop, hard stop. But I want to
It was white all the way through.
Yeah. Anyone want to hear the rest? You gave us 3. I want to hear the rest of the 7, right? You got any other tips for us to walk away with?
Yeah, so the first 5, it's all foundation about body, understanding yourself, how to take care of your body based on your individual unique blueprint, based on the Ayurvedic principles. And then you expand on the mission, on digesting the reality. You need an inner fire for that. And then you step to self-leadership so you can lead others.
Amazing. I love that. Give them a round of applause. That's it for our panel discussion. I see hands popping up. Great. You guys are visionaries right here at Education 2.0. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, my dear panelists. Thank you.